is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The UK's new health minister gets to work after the resignation of his predecessor. Now the pressure's on to lift the last COVID restrictions.
Our other headlines: an unseasonably hot southern Italy sets the scene for G20 and talks on climate change.
An unprecedented, life-threatening heat wave in North America as well. Canada and the United States sizzle in record temperatures.
One of the world's biggest hydroelectric power stations switches on the green energy in China.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says England appears to be on track to return to normal life on the 19th of July. The final stage of COVID restrictions were pushed back by 4 weeks over concerns that the Delta variant is spreading rapidly.
The surge of that variant in the UK has caused countries right around the world to take action. Portugal, Malta and Spain have tightened entry requirements for UK travellers. Hong Kong has also announced new measures. It will ban all passenger flights from the UK starting in July after adding the country to its extremely high-risk group. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Nicole Johnston at Westminster. Nicole, the UK has a new health minister after the resignation of Matt Hancock. What is Sajid Javid saying about fully reopening in the UK?
Well, he's expected to address the House of Commons sometime within the hour, but earlier today he said that it is an absolute priority to fully lift all of those COVID-19 restrictions, and they hope to do that on the 19th of July. Now, both the new Health Secretary and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson are indicating that the country is on track to do that, even though we've had a big increase in coronavirus new cases of infection, some 22,000 in the last 24 hours.
And international travel once again dominating the news headlines. How is it becoming harder to travel out of the UK after this vaccination success in Britain?
That's right. For anyone hoping to leave the UK and for those businesses across Europe who depend on British travellers over the summer, it's more bad news. So Spain, Portugal and Malta have all decided that British travellers who haven't been double vaccinated will have to quarantine for 2 weeks. The other big development, of course, as you mentioned earlier, is Hong Kong. Hong Kong has banned all flights from the UK. So all of this is not auguring well for the UK sort of reopening its international travel. Of course, their concern is the spread of the Delta variant. We know that France and Germany are really spearheading an effort to try and get all of the countries inside the European Union bloc to introduce quarantine. But of course, those Mediterranean countries are sort of trying to resist that, countries like Greece, because they are so dependent on British travellers.
Now, there is some uplifting news today on new research on vaccines. A new study suggesting a third shot of AstraZeneca vaccine could work as a booster.
That's right. That study has come out of Oxford University. They've said that if you have a third shot 6 months after your second shot, it could increase your protection and give a really good boost to the antibodies. Now, that would be very useful if it turns out that towards the end of the year, people's immunity starts to wane. We've also had another study come out just in the last few minutes, and that's found that if you mix vaccines, be it first dose AstraZeneca, second dose Pfizer, or vice versa, that mixing them is not a problem, and that also gives a very good level of protection.
Nicole Johnston in Westminster, thank you very much.
One of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges, Binance, has been banned from advertising and establishing a UK-based operation by Britain's financial watchdog. It's the latest in a growing global crackdown by regulators on the crypto market over concerns about its potential role in money laundering and fraud. Jason Dean is a Bitcoin analyst at Quantum Economics.
Well, Binance is one of the major exchanges that allows you to buy, sell, hold and trade cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and other assets such as Ethereum, EOS, Cardano. There's quite a long list, actually. And you can do this anywhere in the world, including the UK.
So talk us through what's happened here with the UK financial regulator.
Well, the FCA issued a statement over the weekend, actually, which seems to have caused a bit of a stir. I saw a headline this morning that says FCA bans Binance, which is a bit of an exaggeration because it's actually nothing like this at all. What this is a reminder to Binance.com, which, remember, is an international site with international customers, reminding them not to promote certain assets, certain products here in the UK. Now, we should be clear about this. The products they're referring to are derivatives, and these are more complex instruments that traders can use. They're such as options, futures, those kind of things. They do fall under the FCA regulations, and it doesn't matter actually what the underlying asset is. You have to be FCA regulated to use those. But this is a long-standing edict. This is a reminder. It's not a new policy. So to be clear, if you hold Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of those other assets, you are perfectly entitled to carry on holding them, and actually the FCA is not requiring you to do anything with them.
So why is there this pushback from regulators around the world against cryptocurrency platforms?
Well, I wouldn't say that I necessarily agree with you that this is happening all around the world. We do have some quite wide-ranging events going on here. We do have countries like El Salvador, which of course is fully embracing Bitcoin and actually has made it now legal tender. But then we've got countries on the other end of the scale, like China, for example, who are actively trying to discourage use of cryptocurrencies through regulation and various other means. So this is become, and there's everything in between as well. So it is a complex situation, and you've got to, in some ways, feel a bit sorry for regulators here because this is a difficult subject. But we do have a precedent because, you know, back in the 90s, we had this open source network called the internet that came along, created all sorts of problems for us with jurisdictions and copyright. We were worried about whether terrorists were going to use it for nefarious purposes, that sort of thing. And several decades in, we are still coming to terms with this and still shaping it. And I very much suspect we'll see the same thing with Bitcoin exchanges and other cryptocurrency assets.
Is there an underlying message here from the regulators to consumers, maybe consumers in the UK in particular? I mean, do you think about investing in cryptocurrencies in general?
Well, investing in cryptocurrency, like investing in any asset, you must do your own research and you must understand carefully what you're getting involved with. But in terms of what the FCA is saying here, it really is a non-event. You can still continue to hold your assets, you can still trade, you can still buy, as long as you're buying the asset itself, which the vast majority of people do anyway. So in many ways, it's business as usual. Business
as usual, but you feel that this is maybe sowing the seeds for future regulation in the same way that the World Wide Web is less of a Wild West than it was at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. And actually many in the industry, actually including myself, would welcome measured common sense regulation here because it would be great for people to have that peace of mind when buying it, trading it, holding it, that there is some kind of regulation behind it. But remember, you can't regulate the asset itself because it's entirely decentralized and there's no successful way to do that. Any attempt to do it will simply not work.
Foreign ministers from the world's 20 leading economies and the EU are arriving for talks in Italy. The summit looks set to be dominated by climate change, as well as the COVID pandemic and the economic recovery from it. We're live to the city of Bari and our correspondent Tony Waterman, who's there for us. Tony, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Rome. So much on the agenda. What can we expect to hear from this summit?
You're right, Jamie. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been on the ground now for a couple of days, a very packed schedule. He met with the Pope, actually, earlier today, where they discussed one of the central issues for this upcoming ministerial summit, and that is climate change. Not every minister is going to be here in southern Italy when they do meet tomorrow in Matera. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister is going to be joining by video, but when they do sit around their respective tables and laptops, they're going to be discussing the COVID pandemic and the economic recovery for this. The G20 is the global forum for economic and financial cooperation, and really since the global financial crisis of 2008, there has not been such a pressing urgency for this type of cooperation. The pandemic has impacted every single corner of the planet, and at this point we're seeing trillions of dollars sloshing around in these recovery funds, and what these ministers really want to ensure is that this money is spent wisely, that countries build back better, greener and more sustainable as they try to deal with climate change and really tackling this global issue. And I can tell you that it is blazing hot here in Italy as this summit gets underway.
The sunny, dry climate of southern Italy has allowed olive trees to thrive for centuries. Nearly all of the country's famed extra virgin olive oil comes from here, with the Apulia region producing 2 million tons every single year. But lately, it's been too much of a good thing. It's been unseasonably hot, with little to no rain since May.
The high temperature increase the evaporation of the water, and we must increase the use of the water by irrigation system. Increase the cost, the income reduce, and so on.
Changing weather patterns are impacting the farmers in this region, where 40% of the population is dependent on the industry. Southern Italy has suffered from prolonged drought for years. Water is scarce, and in some areas the soil is increasingly salty as water levels rise. Here at the Mediterranean Agronomic Institute of Bari, scientists are working on ways to make the sector more sustainable, checking soil quality, experimenting with different fertilizers. These tomato plants are undergoing biostimulation to promote growth and resilience. But Deputy Director Biagio Di Tolizzi says it will take a much more holistic approach to ensure food security in the future.
We need the policies, but we need also the farmers, that they feel that the policy are supporting them. Then, of course, the funds is an instrument to make this more, this chain from the decision maker to the farmers as short as possible.
Food security will be a main topic of discussion when G20 foreign affairs and development ministers meet in Matera, Italy on Tuesday. They'll discuss concrete ways to build resilient and sustainable food systems, with the ultimate goal of eradicating global hunger by 2030. An ambitious goal increasingly complicated by climate change.
Tony, how deep, I wonder, are the divisions on climate change amongst all of the member states?
Well, Jamie, I think it would be fair to say that generally everybody has a consensus that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. Of course, we see different policies in place and different leaders in place. Brazil, for instance, Jair Bolsonaro is somebody who has not been exactly a champion of climate change. There are concerns there, but you have the EU, which is joining G20, which is part of G20, that right now has a $1 trillion plus recovery fund for the COVID pandemic. And a third of that money has to be earmarked for green projects to fight climate change. The overall goal, of course, for the EU is to be climate neutral by 2050. So this money is going towards things like sustainable agriculture, also the electrification of travel networks, refitting buildings so they're more energy efficient. China also has very ambitious climate goals to be carbon neutral by 2060, really trying to get coal out of the supply chain network, and something that they're relying on. So these countries do have a common goal. It is in all of their interests to really fight towards tackling climate change. And I think you have a big shift taking place now, of course, now that U.S. President Joe Biden is at the helm of the United States. It's a difference from when Donald Trump was in the White House, who was a climate denier in a lot of ways, pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord. The U.S. is now back in that and taking a very active role that we've seen in the G7 that took place a couple of weeks ago, NATO, as well as the EU-U.S. summit. This is an issue that is at the forefront of politicians' mind, not just because of the economic damage it can do, but also because of other consequences that are more tertiary. You think about migration, areas where it's very warm. People might have to be moving because there's not enough food security. I was at that institute earlier today speaking to the deputy director of the program, and he said, listen, it's really difficult to get these young people to stay at the farms in southern Italy because there's just so much uncertainty. The average income, 20,000 euros a year, and a lot of young people saying that's just not enough money for the amount of work that it takes to be sustainable and profitable. You add to that climate change, the extra burden. This is something that these governments are taking very seriously, and this is why we are seeing it really at the top of the agenda at all of these summits that are taking place now.
Tony, so much of this comes down to money, of course, and in Europe it comes down to EU funding, EU money on so many fronts.
Yeah, you're right. It does cost a lot of money to make this type of transition. We're talking about completely overhauling economies and the way that they function, taking that old infrastructure and either upgrading it or getting rid of it completely and putting in all new infrastructure. That takes a lot of money. But we have seen these projects, as I mentioned, from the Commission with the recovery funds being earmarked for this specifically, also from the European Central Bank making a point of putting money into green projects, green bonds. This is something that is increasingly important. And when we're talking about those young people perhaps not wanting to stay within the farming industries in places like Europe, these are like Italy, these are also the people that are at the forefront when it comes to new types of investing into companies that are really taking this seriously. So I think that this is a money issue. It is going to require a lot of money. We're talking tens of trillions of dollars. And realistically, Europe is going to have to help its neighbors as well if they want to meet their climate objectives, because they can become climate and carbon neutral all they want. But if that is still not being met, those ambitions are still not being met worldwide, we still have a global climate problem.
Tony Waterman in Italy, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, temperatures reach an 84-year record. Canada and the United States frazzle in record heat.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN and the CGTN app.
The Swedish Prime Minister has resigned. Stefan Löfven lost a parliamentary confidence vote, which meant he had to quit or call an election. It now falls to the country's parliamentary speaker to choose a successor. If no one emerges after the speaker's fourth attempt, an election must be held. Any new administration will be a short one, as regular polls must be held in 2022.
Italians no longer need to wear a face mask outside. Many, though, say they're reluctant to discard them, despite the lowering of coronavirus restrictions. Across the country, Italians have had to adhere to strict rules for nearly a year. Masks must still be worn inside or in groups of people where social distancing is not possible.
France's right wing has suffered a setback in the regional elections. The National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen failed to gain a single seat amid a record low turnout. President Emmanuel Macron's En Marche party also failed to win overall control of any region, but there was a surprise boost for both centre-right Republicans and socialists.
Greece says it will offer young people a cash reward of $180 for receiving at least one coronavirus vaccine ahead of the busy summer season. The cash will be offered to people aged 18 to 25. They'll also receive 1 month free internet data on their phones in August. With COVID cases easing, the country ended a mandatory wearing of masks outdoors last week.
It's a small thank you from the Greek state, the only obligation on your part being to do something I am certain you would have done anyway. Go and get vaccinated to protect yourselves and those you love.
The European Union's climate targets are now legally binding after member states back the decision. It's all part of a range of policies on fighting global warming, including a 55% cut in net emissions by 2030 from 1990 levels. Lucy Hoff reports.
This legislation has been designed to put climate change at the heart of EU policymaking. The majority of existing laws are set to meet the previous target of a 40% cut in emissions. That has now shifted significantly to 55% and is now legally binding. Frans Timmermans is the European Commission's Vice President on climate change, who says that Europe is now a world leader on climate issues.
This is the law of laws. This is the law of laws because it will discipline us in the years to come to stay within the boundaries we've set, which is a reduction of at least 55% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 as compared to 1990 and climate neutrality by 2050.
The deal was struck by EU member states and lawmakers here in Brussels back in April and has now been given the final stamp of approval by EU capitals. Only Bulgaria abstained, saying the deal didn't reflect its national interests sufficiently. The deal will now mark a major upheaval in terms of policymaking in a range of sectors, from energy, industry and transport. And we'll see a range of reforms, such as tougher rules on CO2 emissions for new cars, as well as carbon market reform. Lucy Hoff, CGTN, Brussels.
Temperatures have hit an all-time high in Canada and the US Pacific Northwest as officials warn of an unprecedented, life-threatening heat wave. British Columbia reached a record 46 degrees Celsius, and the US National Weather Service says the dangerous heat levels are likely to continue. I'm getting hot and bothered just thinking about it, so let's speak to someone who always keeps his cool. John Terrett in New York. John, yes. Good to see you. Not breaking out in sweat at all. Tell us a little bit more about these record temperatures.
Yes. Well, actually, I hate to be personal about this, but I am, because it's really hot here in New York as well. This is the hottest weather that the United States has ever recorded. Can you believe that? Now, I know it's a young country, so you don't have to go back too far. 152 years is when I reckon the first weather temperatures were taken in Cleveland, in Ohio, and so federally speaking, a lot less than that. But really, we're going back at least to the 1800s before anybody sees temperatures like this again. And the weather word from the weather forecasters, the boys and girls at the Met Office here, is that this is unprecedented. That's what they're saying, unprecedented. Now, it's bad here where I am in New York, but it's even worse in what they call the Pacific Northwest, which is in the northwest of the country, up on the Canadian border. States like Oregon and Washington State and British Columbia, where they've had temperatures higher by 3 degrees than they've ever seen before, also spreading down into Nevada and California, and I'm fully aware that British Columbia is in Canada, but Canada is affected by this. In Portland, Oregon, for example, yesterday the temperature was 112 Fahrenheit. Now, I do this by doubling it and add 30, so it's 44 Celsius. That's so 44 double it's 88 plus 30, 118. That's good enough for jazz, for Portland, Oregon. And this is hotter than you've ever seen on the centre court at Wimbledon, ever, ever, ever. And the terrible thing is for the people in the Pacific Northwest is that they're not used to it, the poor dears. The poor old things, they're just not used to it, because normally the weather in the Pacific Northwest is well known for being miserable and wet and overcast and rather misty and grey, and so they're just simply not used to this, and they don't have air conditioning. Now, in New York, we simply couldn't survive without air conditioning, because in the summer it is so humid here, and right now it's 88, so that's 31. It's going to be up before the end of the week to 1995, that's 32, north of 32 Celsius then, and it doesn't break until Thursday. Juliet. So we're suffering here.
Yeah, suffering in beautiful sunshine. I mean, the view behind you is absolutely spectacular. And, you know, you mentioned Wimbledon. It is misty and grey here in London, but thank goodness Centre Court now has a roof. I mean, thank goodness for that, otherwise there'd be no play at all. Look, there's got to be some health advice in heat like this. I mean, this is not sunbathing weather, is it? It's dangerous.
Well, no, that's the point. It is dangerous, actually. And although we're smiling about it, as yet we haven't had any fatalities or anything like that, and please God we don't. But it is very, very dangerous indeed, very dangerous. And in fact, the authorities here, it's a bit nanny state-ish, really, in my view. Every television program, every radio program, all the newspapers, they tell you to stay indoors, like we haven't been indoors enough for the last 14 or 15 months. Stay off the gin and get on the water. And check on your pets and neighbours, not necessarily in that order. Now, New York City is starting cooling centres today. People, if they don't have air conditioning, and some don't, then you can go to a cooling centre to cool off. It always interests me to tell you that they don't do the opposite in the winter. They don't do warming centres in the winter because they reckon elderly people and people who are fragile might get injured slipping up on ice going to a warming centre in the winter. But they do cooling centres right now, and they're getting underway. Just a quick note, last Thursday Joe Biden introduced a series of measures to try and calm down gun violence in the summer. It's always upticks in the summer because all American cities are very, very hot and people are outside. He took a series of measures last Thursday to try and calm that down, but last night in Times Square, the window of the world, a young 21-year-old man was shot. He was hit in the back by a bullet that was gang warfare, some kind of warfare, and the bullet hit the building and ricocheted, hit him in the back. Now, he's okay. But, you know, seeing yellow police tape outside the Minskoff Theatre, which is where the Lion King plays on 45th Street, that is absolutely not the message New York is trying to send as it tries to recover. And indeed, Broadway opens fully again in the fall. Juliet and Jamie?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, John. But with your English complexion, please drink lots and slap on some sun cream. Good to speak to you, John Terrick.
Thank you very much.
Back in the UK, Nissan looks set to confirm it's building a huge vehicle battery plant in England. The company could make an official statement this week on a so-called gigafactory in the city of Sunderland. The Japanese manufacturer is said to be in advanced talks with the UK government on the project, which could make around 200,000 car batteries each year and create thousands of jobs.
Burberry was the worst performer on the FTSE 100. Shares fell almost 10% in early trade on the unexpected news that Marco Gobbetti will step down as CEO to take the reins at Italy's Ferragamo. Now, he's been credited with restoring the fortunes of one of Britain's major global luxury fashion brands.
Trading was briefly suspended on Hong Kong Stock Exchange as storms brought chaos to the city. The Hong Kong Weather Observatory issued its most serious black rainstorm warning for the first time this year as torrential downpours led to widespread flooding. Schools have been closed along with vaccination centres and law courts.
Malaysia's stock market has fallen to a 7-month low after the government extended the country's lockdown to fight a surge in COVID infections. Malaysia's main index dropped by 1.2%, its lowest level since November, after daily new cases increased. The extended restrictions, which were supposed to end on Monday, are expected to slow recovery.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the search goes on for the missing in Miami's building collapse. We'll be reporting from the United States.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh,
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The UK's new health minister gets down to work after the resignation of his predecessor, Matt Hancock. Sajid Javid confirmed that the UK would end its last COVID restrictions on the 19th of July.
And an unprecedented, life-threatening heat wave. Canada and the United States sizzle in record temperatures.
China's President Xi Jinping has met his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin via video link. The two leaders have extended their cooperation treaty signed back in 2001.
The meeting's the latest between the two leaders since last month's signing ceremony for a nuclear energy cooperation project. CGTN's Joe Justin reports.
The world's two largest neighbouring countries have more worth celebrating this year. The 100th birthday of the CPC in just 2 days, and the 20th anniversary of the signing of the China-Russia Treaty of Good Neighbourliness and Friendly Cooperation in 3 weeks. Now, the leaders agreed to prolong the treaty. Chinese President Xi Jinping has described the Sino-Russian relations as matured, stable, solid, adding it can weather changes on the global stage. Russian President Vladimir Putin has extended wishes to China's continuous progress in economic and social development and its significant role in global affairs under the CPC's leadership. Both expressed opposition to unilateralism and interference in others' internal affairs in the protest of democracy and human rights. The latest meeting comes less than 2 weeks after the highly anticipated Geneva summit between President Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. The Biden White House has scrambled to restore its relations with European allies at G7 and NATO and ease tensions with Russia amid what it calls growing competition with China.
China-Russia relations have a solid foundation. It hasn't been affected by other major powers, even though the US has tried to meddle in it. The partnership has its inherent demand, and some negative interpretations are unfounded.
Experts say Beijing has been an ardent advocate for a new type of inter-country relationship, focusing on no conflict, non-confrontation, mutual respect, as well as win-win cooperation. China and Russia are looking to shed old great power politics driven by alliances and confrontation, spearheading this more inclusive form of international relations. CGTN, Beijing.
Chinese businesses in the UK are being showcased in an online exhibition by the Chamber of Commerce at the Chinese Embassy with a focus on economic and trade cooperation. Let's talk to CGTN's correspondent Naweed Jabarkil. Naweed, what was said?
Well, Jamie, there are plenty of hurdles at the moment in the UK-China relationship, but one area that's been largely insulated from a lot of the tensions is trade. The UK's fifth largest trading partner is China. Bilateral trade worth about $110 billion each year. And it's not just a recent phenomenon. That's last year's figure. If you look at over the last 20 years, the China-British Business Council, its chair, Sherard Coper-Coles, who was at this webinar, said that exports from the UK to China have risen by more than 900%. And exports from China to the UK rising by a similar amount. But there are those tensions that have crept up, at least from a government perspective, between the UK and China. And that's something that Zhang Zheguang, the new ambassador, Beijing's new ambassador here in London, this was one of his first public appearances, said that he was going to try and mitigate. And there were several areas that he said the two countries could improve cooperation on when it comes to the economy. Things like goods and services, financing has traditionally been a key part of the relationship, if you think of banking, for example. But he also touched upon other areas like nuclear energy and infrastructure as well, which have become more politically more difficult issues here in the UK, at least for China. Jamie.
Naweed, this event comes at a time when UK-China relations, certainly as far as political relations go, are strained. I wonder, does that make trade and business much more important?
Yeah, I think it does, and this is something that Zhang Zheguang, the new ambassador here, is really going to try and focus on. No surprise that this is his first major public appearance in the UK, and it's something related to trade and the economy. Over the past 2 decades, some of those figures that I was mentioning about China's importance to the UK's economy increasing dramatically. There was that golden era of relations ushered in under David Cameron and his finance minister, George Osborne. You'll remember the mood is very, very different at the moment, particularly around Chinese investment here in sensitive areas, as was evidenced by the decision to ban Huawei from the UK's 5G networks last year over national security grounds, something that the company strongly said was that it denied and said it had no threat to the UK's national security. But Zhang Zheguang did speak about those tensions. It wasn't something that he tried to hide away from. He said there were, quote, headwinds in the relationship, but it was something that's not just the UK government, but British people he was hoping would change as well. Have a listen.
China creates opportunities for the UK rather than poses a threat. I believe the British people, who are well known for their good sense of history and pragmatism, will come to an independent judgment about this. The sound development of China-UK relations will provide a stable and predictable macro environment for the cooperation between the enterprises of our two countries.
And it's that last point I think is really important. Regardless of what happens politically, the two countries' economies are very intertwined. The COVID-19 pandemic, for example, highlighted how important those supply chains are. Climate change, another area where they're working on. And the message from this webinar, at least, was regardless of the politics, businesses, at least, are hoping that cooperation continues. Jamie.
Naweed Jabarkil in London, thank you very much.
The United States says it's carried out airstrikes against Iran-backed armed groups near the Iraq-Syria border. The Pentagon says at least 7 militia fighters were killed in the raid, carried out in response to drone attacks on US forces. It's the second such strike since President Biden took office. The United States has 2,500 troops stationed in Iraq as part of a global coalition against so-called Islamic State.
Australia's COVID-19 response committee has held an emergency meeting as outbreaks of the highly contagious Delta variant increased. Around 70% of the population is now under some form of lockdown. Sydney, Australia's most populous city, began a lockdown at the weekend.
At least 7 people are believed killed and another 50 injured after an explosion at a commercial building in the centre of Dhaka. Witnesses say the blast was so strong it blew out the windows of passing buses in the Bangladeshi capital on Sunday. Investigations are centring on a possible gas explosion.
Another body has been recovered from last week's apartment block collapse in Miami. Despite fading hopes, the authorities insist that the recovery is still a search and rescue operation. Engineers are investigating the potential cause after conflicting reports came to light over the building's structural safety. Well, a short time ago, the mayor of Miami-Dade County gave the latest figures from the recovery operation.
This morning, we did recover another body. That brings the count to 10. The total number of those accounted for is now 135, and the total unaccounted, 151.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Giles Gibson. Giles, how confident can rescue workers be of finding anyone else still alive?
Well, look, as we heard from the mayor just then, the progress of this search and rescue operation has just been painfully slow. They are still just combing over that debris field with teams of dogs as well as sonar devices and small robots trying to find any sort of trace of a survivor still trapped in the rubble. They've also brought in over the weekend a couple of large cranes to try and start moving around some of the larger pieces of debris on the site. Really importantly for this search and rescue effort, over the course of the weekend, they managed to put out this fire that had broken out deep in the debris of that partially collapsed building, and that has been a real help for the search and rescue teams in terms of, as this a large truck goes by me, it looks like it's some sort of a water delivery or something like that. That has been a real important factor for the search and rescue teams as they try and find people in the rubble. But it has to be said that nobody has been found alive inside that rubble since Thursday last week, which was just hours after the collapse actually took place.
Giles, I can tell where you are. It looks quite hot, but also quite rainy and possibly mugging. Look, you're there. What other further developments can you tell us about the investigation and what might be hampering or hindering its progress?
Well, we initially had this report from an engineer that was done on the status of the building 3 years ago, back in 2018. And in this report, this engineer talked about major structural damage. That's a direct quote from the report, as well as cracked walls in the garage, which was built underneath the building itself. That report in 2018 was then sent to a Surfside city official in charge of assessing the condition of buildings in the city, and that official then attended a condominium association meeting. This is essentially the group that runs the building day to day, and according to minutes of that meeting that have been obtained by CNN, that official told the residents of this collapsed building that it appears the building is in very good shape. Now look, we don't know at this stage if any of these issues which were identified in that 2018 report actually contributed to the collapse of this building. That, of course, will take months or perhaps years to establish.
Giles Gibson, thank you for the update.
The United Nations has called for systemic racism against black people to be dismantled in a report following the death of George Floyd.
The Human Rights Commissioner says dehumanisation of people of African descent has fed a culture of tolerance for racism across the world. It called for reparations, including monetary compensation. Penelope Leash reports.
His story is now etched into the history books. George Floyd's murder at the hands of a white police officer in May 2020, setting off a wave effect of protests and calls for change. Now the United Nations is officially calling for change too, after a landmark report sparked by his death found racism against people of African descent remains systemic following centuries of mistreatment.
Several families described to me the agony they faced in pursuing truth, justice and redress, and the distressing presumption that their loved ones somehow deserve it. It is disheartening that the system is not stepping up to support them. This must change.
George Floyd's brother shed light not only on the pain of losing his sibling, but living in a culture built on systemic racism.
We live in this place where it's supposed to be the land of the free. But if people are dying because they looked at their cell phones and people thinking it's a gun, or you're dying because people just scared of you, it's a problem.
The UN says systemic racism requires an immediate systemic response to transform the way societies operate.
This will involve reimagining policing and reforming the criminal justice system, which have consistently produced discriminatory outcomes for people of African descent. Only approaches that tackle both the endemic shortcomings in law enforcement and address systemic racism and the legacies it is built on will do justice to the memory of George Floyd and so many others whose lives have been lost or irreparably damaged.
The report aims to speed up action to end racial injustice, make law enforcement accountable, ensure people of African descent are heard and address past wrongs. The UN High Commissioner noting monetary compensation alone is not enough, that it must be part of a suite of measures to help make up for injustices. Penelope Leash, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Switching on the current. The world's second largest hydroelectric power station begins generating green energy in China.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The world's second largest hydroelectric power station has begun generating energy in China. Beijing says the Baihetan Dam on the Yangtze River is a milestone in the country's move towards carbon neutrality. Dai Kai reports.
This hydropower station right here behind me is currently the world's second largest, and on top of the list, of course, is the Three Gorges Dam in central China's Hubei province. And the Baihetan Dam currently has a capacity of 16 million kilowatts and is able to generate more than 62 billion kilowatt hours of electricity a year. And it's worth mentioning that the dam is equipped with the world's first 1 million kilowatt power units. And I have to say that those units are 100% domestically designed, manufactured, and installed in China, which is why the engineers in charge of the construction have been saying that this level of achievement it's enough to put China to the top of the Mount Chomolungma in terms of the hydropower equipment manufacturing. As one of China's major projects for transferring power generated in western regions to the east, the power generated by the first batch of power units this time around will mainly go to the eastern provinces of Jiangsu and Zhejiang, about 2,000 kilometers away from the dam. And for the station to run at full capacity, we'll have to wait till this time next year. By then, the dam's total generating capacity in a single day will be enough to meet the electricity consumption needs of 50 million people. Well, the dam here is meant to be part of the world's largest new energy corridor, and when it goes fully operational, it's going to be able to reduce carbon dioxide emission by more than 50 million tons each year. And that's definitely going to be a big step up for China to peak its carbon emissions and reach carbon neutrality by the middle of the century.
Now, concerns have been raised over the impact of the Baihetan Dam on the natural world. Here's Daiki again reporting on the conservation work being done to safeguard wildlife.
Ever since construction started on the Baihetan Dam, local villagers like Lu Jicheng have been signing up to help trim the vegetation and water the flowers. And he says the efforts have transformed what used to be barren mountains into an area of abundant plant life.
The environment here has improved over the past years. Not long ago, I saw some beautiful birds that have come over. I'd never seen them before, so they must be coming from other areas.
Lu says that the local birds and fish were also well protected throughout the entire process of dam building, as authorities banned hunting birds and fishing from the very beginning. According to local villagers, as the reservoir behind the Baihetan Dam started filling up, the increasing humidity spurred the growth of greenery on nearby mountains.
We've done a lot of work in terms of environmental protection, especially on biodiversity. We built a botanic garden where we've transplanted trees more than 100 years old from the area that'll be submerged by the dam reservoir, and some other local plants as well. It currently hosts 55 types of plants, and the total number of them is about 20,000.
Chen says they've also built a fish breeding station and artificial fish nests for local aquatic species, and established a fish collection system that transfers fish from the lower side of the dam to the upper side, ensuring the normal flow of fish migration traffic both upstream and downstream.
We'll continue our scientific research work on ecological restoration, including soil improvement on high and steep slopes. That will be important for the ecological restoration of dry, hot valley regions, not only here, but also for the entire Jinsha River Basin.
Officials in charge of this mega project say throughout the whole process, the idea of biodiversity protection has been central, as they understand just how much it matters in the long run. The completion of the dam comes just a few months ahead of the UN Biodiversity Conference in Kunming, just 260 kilometers away from the dam. Many expect the conference would provide fresh insights and lead to more efforts to build a future that's friendly to the species and the environment. Dakai CGTN, Liangshan Yi Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province.
Antarctica is on the front line of climate change. Scientists there observe fluctuations in the weather and changing landscapes close up.
So when the snow began to turn an apocalyptic blood red around Ukraine's research station, they were in a unique position to solve the mystery. CGTN's Shini Samara reports.
Antarctica is truly on the front line of climate change. Scientists based there are able to observe the fluctuations in the weather and the changing landscape close up. So when the snow began to turn an apocalyptic blood red around the Ukraine's Verdansk research station, they were in a unique position to solve the mystery.
This is the place where these changes are rapid, where they are visible. The ice is melting, and it's actually what is happening, what we can see at our station. I have been working there for 3 years only, but I can already say that when I was there for my first time, everything was covered with snow for the whole summer. Whereas now, during the last 2 years, the snow is melting and there is a lot of exposed rocks.
So what is the specific focus of the Verdansk research base?
The focus was mainly on meteorological research, on ozone layer research.
The hole in the ozone layer was actually discovered at this research station in 1985, and the station continues to monitor ongoing weather and climate patterns. More recently, though, biologists such as Maria have had a place there as the study of Antarctic biota has come to the forefront of climate science.
We study plants, microbes, algae, birds, whales, and we are trying to focus on their response to the changes that are ongoing in this region.
The red snow, a recent phenomenon, was something that the scientists at the station couldn't miss.
What exactly is happening in Antarctica that is creating this dramatic visual effect?
This is a very, very small single-celled algae, and when they just start developing, they are green, but then they get this red color. This is actually the response to the extreme Antarctic environment that we see, this like the bloody color. The higher temperatures, the more active the biochemical processes are. Therefore, these two processes are connected to more sun, more warming, and that's what gives benefits to them.
Is that an indication of climate change?
These blooms, they can be actually one of the indicators of warming, but we can't be sure what is the speed of this warming, and we can't say a lot about it. We are just observing what is happening.
The algae blooms are alarming purely because of the color. Should we be alarmed?
I'm not sure if we should be alarmed by this, because actually this algae, they are not only the bad sign. Well, they are connected with some warming for sure, but they are important for this ecosystem because these algae, they are food for other creatures. So maybe the ecosystem itself will be also adapting to these changes. Actually, our planet was constantly adapting to some changes.
Maria remains optimistic and stresses the importance of recording the changes taking place and sharing the findings with scientists worldwide.
The fundamental science is something that invests in the future. If we get the information, so we can at least make some forecasts, our world will be changing all the time. It will not stay the same. And what we need is some tools to be able to adapt on time.
And finally, a group of French scouts have built the world's highest tower made from Kepler wooden building blocks. It stands at over 18 metres tall and took 3 days to build. The successful world record attempt was made at a climbing centre in France, and that was so the members of the team could be hoisted up the tower's ever-increasing height. Well, Kepler blocks are mostly identical and have specific dimensions which increase their stability.
Sure, that's cheating. Anyway, the headlines again. The UK's new health minister gets down to work after the resignation of his predecessor, Matt Hancock. Sajid Javid says the government is committed to lifting the remaining COVID restrictions on the 19th of July. That's despite an ongoing rise in COVID infection numbers.
And an unprecedented, life-threatening heat wave in North America. Canada and the United States sizzle in record temperatures. Portland, Oregon has already broken its all-time record hottest temperature, and the peak of the heat wave has not even been reached yet. Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Bye.